Most people wake up and ask, what do I have to do today? The most fulfilled people wake up and ask, why does today matter? There's a difference between opening your eyes and actually waking up. One is biology. The other is a choice. And that choice, made in the first 60 seconds of your day, determines almost everything that follows. So let me ask you, when your alarm goes off tomorrow, will you hit snooze on your life, or will you wake up on purpose? Let me ask you something. When your alarm goes off tomorrow morning, what's the very first thought that crosses your mind? For most people, it's some version of the same tired sentence. What do I have to do today? The emails, the meetings, the gym you promised yourself you'd hit, the kids who need to get to school, a list, a burden, a weight you're already carrying before your feet even touch the floor. And here's the problem with that. When the first thought of your day is a list of tasks, you're not waking up, you're just being interrupted. Your alarm clock becomes an alarm, in the truest sense of the word. Something that signals danger. Something that pulls you out of peace and drops you straight into pressure. No wonder so many of us hit snooze. No wonder so many of us dread mornings. We've trained ourselves to associate waking up with obligation instead of purpose. But watch what happens with the people who seem to have this figured out. Watch the entrepreneur who's up before the sun, not because a boss is forcing her to be, but because she can't wait to keep building the thing she started. Watch the father who wakes up an hour before his kids just so he can have 15 quiet minutes to remember what all of this, the exhaustion, the sacrifice, the long days, is actually for. Watch the athlete who laces up his shoes in the dark, not because a coach is watching, but because somewhere inside him is a reason bigger than the discomfort of getting out of bed. These people are not doing the same thing you're doing. They're not just waking up. They're waking up on purpose. This is the difference between what and why. What you do is get out of bed. What you do is start your routine, your commute, your job, your responsibilities. But why you do it, that's the part most of us never stop to ask. And because we never ask it, we let the what lead. We let the to-do list set the tone for our entire day, and then we wonder why we feel exhausted before we've even had our coffee. Here's the truth. Your body doesn't wake up early because of your alarm clock. Your spirit wakes up early because of your why. Discipline without purpose is just punishment. It's forcing yourself to do something you don't understand the point of, and eventually, every single one of us runs out of willpower for that. But purpose without discipline never even needs willpower. Because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're not dragging yourself out of bed. You're being pulled out of bed by something that matters more to you than 5 more minutes of comfort. Think about the last time you were truly excited about something, a trip, a big opportunity, a moment you'd been waiting for. Did you need an alarm clock that day? Did you hit snooze 5 times? Of course not. You were up before the sun, heart racing, ready. That is what a why does to a person. It doesn't make mornings easier. It makes mornings meaningful. And meaning is more powerful than motivation, because motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. They show up when they want to, and they leave without warning. But a why isn't a feeling. It's a foundation. It's there on your best days, and it's there on your worst days, quietly waiting for you to remember it. So before you can change your mornings, you have to answer a much harder question. Why does today matter to you? Not to your boss, not to your family, not to society's definition of a productive person. To you. What is it that you're actually building? Who is it that you're actually becoming? What is the version of your life that's waiting for you on the other side of consistency? And is that version worth waking up for? Because here's what I've noticed. The people who wake up early and actually sustain it, not for a week, not for a motivational 30-day challenge, but for years, they're not doing it because someone told them mornings are sacred. They're doing it because they found something worth protecting. Some of them are protecting their health. Some are protecting their families. Some are protecting a dream they haven't told anyone about yet because it still feels too fragile to say out loud. But every single one of them has a why standing guard at the start of their day, and that why is stronger than the pull of the pillow. If you're someone who has tried 100 times to fix your mornings, new alarm clocks, new apps, new rules, new punishments for hitting snooze, and none of it has stuck, I want you to hear this clearly. Your mornings were never actually the problem. Your why was missing. You were trying to build a habit on top of nothing, and habits without purpose collapse the moment life gets hard. And life always gets hard. So tonight, before you set your alarm, Don't just decide what time you're going to wake up. Decide why you're waking up. Write it down if you have to. Say it out loud if you need to hear it in your own voice. Because tomorrow, when that alarm rings, you are not going to need more discipline. You are not going to need a louder alarm or a colder shower or a more aggressive morning routine. You are going to need one thing and one thing only. A reason that matters more than 5 more minutes of sleep. Start with why. Not what you have to do, but why you're doing any of it at all. Because the moment you know your why, waking up early stops being a battle you fight every single morning, and it finally becomes something else entirely. A choice you make on purpose for a life you actually want. Think about the last time someone broke a promise to you. Maybe it was small, they said they'd call and didn't. Maybe it was bigger, they said they'd show up and they didn't. Whatever it was, notice what happened inside you. You didn't just feel disappointed, you started to trust them a little less. And the next time they made a promise, some part of you quietly braced itself, just in case. That's how trust works. It's not built in speeches. It's not built in good intentions. It's built, or broken, in the small, repeated moments where someone either follows through or they don't. Now here's the uncomfortable question. How many promises have you broken to yourself? I'll start tomorrow. I'll wake up early next week. This is the last time I'll hit snooze. We say these things to ourselves so casually, as if they don't count, as if the only person listening is us, so it doesn't really matter. But it does matter. Because every single time you tell yourself you're going to do something and then you don't, you are teaching yourself, training yourself. The same way you'd train a team member or a child, that your word doesn't actually mean anything. And once that lesson sinks in deep enough, it stops being about mornings. It starts becoming about everything. You stop believing your own commitments. You stop trusting your own decisions. You start hesitating before you set goals at all. Because some part of you already expects to let yourself down. This is why waking up early is never really about the morning. It's about something much bigger happening underneath the surface. The slow, quiet rebuilding of trust between you and yourself. Think about the leaders you've actually respected in your life, not the ones with the biggest titles, but the ones who earned real trust. What made them different? It wasn't one grand gesture. It wasn't a single inspiring speech. It was consistency. It was the fact that they said what they meant and did what they said over and over in ways so small you almost stopped noticing them, until one day you realized you trusted this person completely without even being able to point to the exact moment it happened. That's what trust actually looks like. It's built in the ordinary, repeated, unglamorous moments, not the extraordinary ones. And that is exactly what happens when your alarm goes off and you get up anyway. It doesn't feel like much in the moment. Nobody's watching. Nobody's clapping. There's no reward waiting for you at 5:47 a.m. when you swing your legs out of bed instead of pulling the blanket back over your head. But something is happening in that moment. Something far more important than the extra sleep you're giving up. You are proving something to yourself. You are saying silently, when I say I'm going to do something, I actually do it. And your mind hears that. Your mind keeps score, whether you're paying attention or not. This is what I mean when I say discipline isn't punishment. It's leadership. Not leadership over other people. Leadership over yourself. Because leading yourself means the exact same thing as leading anyone else. It means becoming someone people can rely on. And the first person who needs to be able to rely on you is you. Here's what happens when you get this right. Once you've proven to yourself, morning after morning, that your word is solid, that when you commit to something, it actually happens, everything else in your life starts to shift. You stop negotiating with yourself over things that used to feel impossible. You stop needing motivation to follow through because you're not relying on how you feel in the moment anymore. You're relying on evidence. You have proof, real proof, built morning by morning, that you are someone who does what they say. And that kind of self-trust doesn't stay contained to your mornings. It leaks into your work, your relationships, your goals, your confidence in every hard decision you have to make. But the reverse is also true, and this is the part people don't want to hear. Every time you hit snooze after telling yourself you wouldn't, every time you say just this once and let yourself off the hook, you're making a withdrawal from that same account. And small withdrawals don't feel dangerous in the moment. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. Nobody breaks trust with themselves in one catastrophic morning. It happens in 100 quiet, forgivable-seeming mornings until one day you look up and you don't recognize the person who used to believe they could do hard things. So when you set that alarm tonight, understand what you're actually doing. You are not just scheduling a wake-up time, you are making a promise. And tomorrow morning, when that alarm goes off and the room is cold and the bed is warm and every reasonable part of your brain is negotiating for 5 more minutes, you are not just choosing between sleep and no sleep. You are choosing whether your word means something. You are choosing whether you are the kind of person who keeps promises. Starting with the promises no one else will ever know you made. That's the account you're building, one wake-up at a time. And here's the beautiful part. Self-trust compounds exactly like anything else worth building. It starts small. It starts invisible. But show up enough mornings, keep enough quiet promises, and eventually you become someone who doesn't just believe they can change their life. They've already proven it, alarm by alarm, sunrise by sunrise. And once you trust yourself that deeply, there is very little in this world you won't be willing to attempt. Not because you're suddenly fearless, but because you finally truly believe your own word. Have you ever noticed how differently you perform when you feel safe versus when you feel threatened? Think about a time you had to speak up in a room where you knew people had your back versus a time you had to speak up in a room full of judgment. Same words, maybe even the same message, but a completely different experience. When you feel safe, ideas flow. Creativity shows up. You take risks you wouldn't normally take because some part of your brain has quietly decided it's okay to be seen here. But when you feel threatened, everything shrinks. You second-guess yourself. You play it safe with your words, your ideas, your presence. You protect yourself instead of expressing yourself. This isn't a personality trait, it's biology. And it applies just as powerfully to the relationship you have with yourself as it does to any team, any family, any room full of people. This is what's really happening in the first hour of your day, whether you've ever thought about it this way or not. The way you wake up sets the emotional temperature for everything that follows. Wake up in a scramble, alarm blaring, running late, phone lighting up with notifications before your eyes have even adjusted to the light, and you are, in that very first moment, sending a signal to your own nervous system. Today is an emergency, and your body listens. It responds the way it's designed to respond to emergencies. It gets defensive. It gets reactive. It starts scanning for threats instead of opportunities. And you carry that state with you, often without even realizing it, into every meeting, every conversation, every decision for the rest of the day. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine waking up with a few unhurried minutes where nothing is required of you yet. No scramble, no emergency, just quiet. In that quiet, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system gets a message too, but it's a completely different one. It says, today is safe. And from that place of safety, you don't just feel calmer, you actually think better. You make clearer decisions. You respond to problems instead of reacting to them. You show up to your own life the way a great leader shows up to their team, grounded, present, and able to handle whatever comes next, because they're not operating from fear. This is the idea behind what's sometimes called the circle of safety. The understanding that people don't do their best work when they're anxious and defensive. They do their best work when they feel protected enough to take risks, to be honest, to try and sometimes fail without falling apart. Great leaders build that kind of safety for their teams on purpose. They don't leave it to chance. They create the conditions where people can perform at their highest level, because safety isn't the opposite of high performance. Safety is the foundation that high performance is built on. And here's what most people miss. You have to build that same circle of safety for yourself, starting with the very first moments of your day. Because if you are constantly waking up in chaos, constantly starting your day already behind, already stressed, already reacting, instead of choosing, you are, without realizing it, keeping yourself in a permanent state of low-level threat. And a person operating from threat cannot access their full potential. It's not possible. The same brain that's busy protecting you from a bad morning is not available to dream big, solve hard problems, or build the life you actually want. Those two states, protection and growth, cannot fully coexist. Your body has to choose one or the other. And most people, without ever deciding to, are choosing protection every single morning simply because of how they wake up. This is why a calm morning is not a luxury. It's not something only morning people get to enjoy while the rest of us grind through. A calm morning is a strategy. It is one of the most underrated tools you have for changing the entire trajectory of your day because it determines which version of you shows up to everything that follows. The reactive version, defended and rushed, or the grounded version, capable and clear. Think about what becomes possible when you give yourself even 15 or 20 minutes of peace before the demands of the day begin. You're not just avoiding stress, you're actually building capacity. You're strengthening your ability to sit with silence instead of needing constant noise and distraction. You're practicing being present with yourself before you're expected to be present for everyone else. And that practice matters more than people realize because you cannot give calm to your team, your family, your relationships if you have never once given it to yourself. There's a pattern I want you to notice. Chaos breeds chaos, and calm breeds clarity. Rush through your morning, and you'll likely rush through your decisions all day, reacting instead of choosing, defending instead of building. But start your morning from a place of peace, even a small, imperfect, 5-minute version of peace, and you give yourself the best possible chance of carrying that clarity into everything else you do. Not because the challenges of the day disappear. They don't. The emails still come. The meetings still happen. The problems still show up right on schedule, but you meet them differently. You meet them from a place of strength instead of survival. So the real question isn't just what time should I wake up? The real question is, what environment am I creating for myself in those first waking moments? Am I building a circle of safety, or am I starting my day already under siege? Because the version of you that shows up rushed and reactive at 6 a.m. is not the same version of you that could show up calm and capable at 6 a.m. Same person, same day, completely different outcome. And that difference, more than any productivity hack, any to-do list, any motivational quote, is what determines whether your mornings are working for you or quietly working against you. There are two kinds of games in this world, and almost everyone confuses them. In a finite game, the players are known, the rules are fixed, and there's a clear endpoint. Someone wins, someone loses, and then the game is over. Football is a finite game. Chess is a finite game. But most of the things that actually matter in life, your career, your relationships, your health, your growth as a person, those are not finite games. They're infinite games. There is no final buzzer. There is no moment where you win, and the game ends, and you get to stop playing. The only real goal in an infinite game is to keep playing, to stay in it for as long as possible. Because the game itself doesn't end. Only your participation in it does. This distinction changes absolutely everything about how you should think about your mornings. Most people treat their morning routine like a finite game. They wake up early for 30 days and wait for something to declare them the winner. They're looking for the moment it pays off, the moment their body transforms, their productivity skyrockets, their life visibly changes, and they get to stand back and say, I did it, I won, I can relax now. And when that moment doesn't arrive on schedule, because it never does, not in the neat, dramatic way we imagine, they conclude the whole thing isn't working. They quit. Not because waking up early failed them, but because they were playing the wrong game the entire time. Here's the truth. Nobody tells you at the start of a new habit. There is no finish line for becoming a better version of yourself. There's no morning where you wake up and you're finally, permanently done. The person who wakes up early today still has to wake up early tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that for the rest of their life if they want to keep the benefits that come with it. This isn't discouraging. This is actually liberating once you understand it correctly. Because it means you were never supposed to win your mornings. You were only ever supposed to stay in the game. Think about the people you know who seem to have truly transformed their lives. The ones who got in incredible shape, or built a business from nothing, or became remarkably calm and grounded people. If you look closely, you'll almost never find a single dramatic turning point. You'll find years of small, boring, unremarkable repetition. You'll find someone who simply refused to stop showing up. Long after the initial motivation wore off, long after anyone was watching, long after it stopped feeling exciting and started just feeling like what they do. They weren't chasing a finish line. They were playing the long game, one unremarkable day at a time, for so long that the compounding eventually became undeniable. This is why so many people fail at building a consistent morning routine. Not because they lack discipline, but because they're measuring themselves against the wrong kind of success. They wake up early for a week, Don't feel transformed and think they've failed. But you cannot fail at an infinite game in a week. You can only fail at an infinite game by quitting it entirely. The failure was never the groggy Tuesday where you almost hit snooze. The failure is deciding that one groggy Tuesday means the whole thing isn't worth continuing. When you stop playing the finite game with your mornings, something shifts in how you handle setbacks. You slept through your alarm? That's not a loss. That's not proof the system is broken. That's just a moment inside a much longer game. A game you're still very much in, as long as you show up again tomorrow. The infinite game mindset gives you permission to have a bad morning without it meaning anything about your character, your discipline, or your future. One morning is just one data point in a game that spans years, maybe decades. It was never going to be won or lost on a Tuesday. This also changes what you're actually optimizing for. In a finite game, you optimize for the win, the fastest results, the most impressive transformation, the version of your routine that looks best from the outside. But in an infinite game, you optimize for something completely different, sustainability. You start asking better questions. Not, how extreme can I make this morning routine, but how can I build a morning I can actually keep showing up for 20 years from now without resenting it? That question changes everything. It means you stop chasing the version of a morning routine you saw online, built for someone else's life, and you start building the version that fits your actual life, one you could realistically sustain not for 30 days, but for 30 years. Because here's what the infinite game teaches us that the finite game never could. Consistency beats intensity every single time over a long enough horizon. The person who wakes up moderately early, sustainably, for the next 10 years will outpace the person who wakes up at 4 a.m. for 3 intense weeks and then burns out completely. It's not about how hard you can go. It's about how long you can stay in the game. And staying in the game requires you to let go of the need for dramatic, visible proof that it's working. Some of the most important changes happening inside you right now, in your discipline, your self-trust, your nervous system, your character, are completely invisible today. They won't show up as a single triumphant morning. They'll show up as a person, years from now, who has quietly become someone entirely different, simply because they never stopped showing up. So release yourself from the pressure of trying to win your mornings. You were never supposed to win them. You were only ever supposed to keep playing, showing up again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, not because you're chasing a finish line, but because staying in the game for as long as you possibly can is the entire point. That's not a lesser goal. That's the only goal that was ever real. Think about someone in your life who always seemed to be the first one up and the last one to sit down. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a coach, or a manager, or an older sibling. Someone who was awake and ready before anyone else needed them to be, and who was still working long after everyone else had gone home. At the time, you probably didn't think much about it. It just seemed like that's who they were. But looking back now, you can probably see what was actually happening. That person wasn't just managing their own life. They were creating space for everyone around them to feel taken care of. And that kind of presence doesn't happen by accident. It's a choice, made quietly, over and over, usually before the sun even comes up. There's an idea about leadership that gets misunderstood constantly. People assume leaders are the ones who get the most, the corner office, the recognition, the privileges that come with rank. But if you actually study the leaders people would walk through fire for, you find the opposite pattern. The best leaders give up their comfort first, so that the people around them don't have to. They eat last, not because someone forces them to, but because true leadership was never about being served. It's about serving. And that instinct, that willingness to go first and give first, doesn't switch on the moment someone hands you a title. It's built in the smaller, unwitnessed moments, long before anyone is calling you a leader at all. And one of the earliest, quietest versions of that instinct shows up in something as simple as what time you choose to get out of bed. Because here's what waking up early is actually training in you, whether you realize it or not, the willingness to go first. To show up before comfort demands it. To do the hard, unglamorous thing before anyone asks you to, before there's applause, before there's a reason other than the fact that it needed to be done. That is not a small skill. That is the exact same skill that separates people who talk about leadership from people who actually live it. Think about what it means, practically, to be the one who's up first in your house, your team, your family. It means you're the one with the calm mind while everyone else is still catching up. It means you've already had your quiet moment, already gathered yourself, already found your footing, and now, instead of needing something from the day, you have something to give it. That's an enormous shift. Most people wake up needing. They need coffee. They need 5 more minutes. They need the day to be gentle with them before they can be gentle with anyone else. But the person who wakes up early, who has already done the quiet work of preparing themselves, wakes up with something in reserve. And that reserve is exactly what the people around you are hoping you'll have, even if they never say it out loud. Think about a parent who wakes up before their children, not to get ahead on emails, not to optimize their morning, but simply to have a few minutes of peace before the noise and needs of the day begin. That parent isn't just being productive. They're making sure that when their child walks into the kitchen, they're met by someone calm instead of someone scrambling. That's leadership. It's small. It's invisible. Nobody's handing out awards for it. But it's real, and it matters more than almost anything you'll do that day, because you cannot pour calm into someone else's morning if you've never once poured it into your own. The same is true in any team, any workplace, any group of people counting on you. The people who consistently show up early, prepared, before it's required of them, they're not doing it to impress anyone. They're doing it because somewhere along the way, they understood a simple truth. You cannot lead from behind. You cannot ask people to bring their best when you haven't first brought yours. Waking up early is, in a very real sense, a rehearsal for exactly this kind of leadership. It's you practicing, privately, the discipline of showing up before you're asked to, so that when the moment comes to actually lead someone else, you already know how. This is why waking up early isn't really about productivity, and it was never really about getting more done before 9 a.m. It's about becoming the kind of person others can lean on. It's about earning, quietly and repeatedly, the right to be trusted with someone else's morning, someone else's crisis, someone else's bad day, because you've already proven to yourself first that you can be the steady one. Nobody trusts a leader who's never learned to show up for themselves. And nobody becomes a leader worth following by waiting until leadership is required of them to start practicing it. So when you choose to get up before you have to, before the day demands it, before anyone's watching, before there's any reward beyond the quiet satisfaction of having done it, understand what you're actually building. You're not just gaining an extra hour. You are training the exact muscle that every great leader relies on. The willingness to go first, to give before you receive, to show up for others, because you've already shown up for yourself. That training doesn't happen in the big, visible moments of your life. It happens in the small, silent decision to get out of a bed while the world is still asleep, simply because someone, even if it's just you, for now, needed you to. There's a reason so many people fail at building a morning routine, and it has nothing to do with laziness, and it has nothing to do with willpower. It has to do with a single, quiet lie we've all been told at some point, the lie that says you need to have it all figured out before you're allowed to begin. The perfect routine, the perfect wake-up time, the perfect sequence of habits copied from someone whose life looks nothing like yours. And so people wait. They research. They plan. They tell themselves they'll start properly on Monday, or the first of the month, or once things settle down. And in that waiting, months pass, sometimes years, and nothing actually changes. Not because the person didn't want change badly enough, but because they were holding out for a version of themselves that only exists after they've already started. Here is something worth sitting with. Motivation was never designed to carry you very far. Motivation is a spark, bright, exciting, and, by its very nature, temporary. It shows up when you watch an inspiring video, when you set a big goal, when the calendar flips to a new year. And for a few days, it feels like more than enough. But motivation was never built for the long haul, because motivation depends on how you feel, and how you feel changes by the hour, let alone by the week. This is precisely why so many people can move mountains for the first 5 days of a new habit and then completely vanish by day 6, not because they failed, but because they were relying on something that was never meant to last that long in the first place. Purpose is different. Purpose doesn't need you to feel excited. Purpose doesn't disappear the moment the excitement fades, because purpose was never dependent on excitement to begin with. It's there on the mornings you're tired. It's there on the mornings nothing seems to be working. It's there, quietly, even when motivation has completely left the building, because purpose isn't a feeling you're chasing. It's a reason you've already found. And that difference is the entire reason some people build lasting change, while others simply cycle through the same failed attempt year after year, always starting over, never actually building. But even purpose, as powerful as it is, means nothing if it never turns into a first step. This is the part people resist the most, because the first step is almost always disappointing. It's smaller than we want it to be. It doesn't look like the transformation we imagine. Waking up 10 minutes earlier tomorrow doesn't feel like it belongs in the same story as the person you're hoping to become. It feels too small to matter. And that feeling, the sense that a step this small couldn't possibly lead anywhere significant, is exactly what stops most people before they ever really begin. But nothing meaningful was ever built any other way. Every single transformation you've ever admired in someone else started as a step so small it was almost invisible at the time. Nobody wakes up on day one already living as the person they're working to become. They wake up slightly earlier than the day before. They show up slightly more prepared than the day before. They make one decision, then another, and it's only when you look backward, months or years later, that the pattern reveals itself as something significant. In the moment, it never feels like progress. It just feels like showing up again. This is why perfection is such a dangerous trap. Perfection asks you to wait until conditions are ideal before you're allowed to start, and conditions are never ideal. There will never be a week without stress, a season without disruption, a version of your life so calm and orderly that waking up early finally becomes easy. If you wait for that version of your life to arrive before you begin, you will wait forever. Because that version of life doesn't exist for anyone, not for the people you admire, not for the leaders you look up to, not for a single person who has ever actually built something lasting. They didn't wait for perfect conditions. They simply began imperfectly and kept adjusting as they went. Progress asks something completely different of you. Progress doesn't require you to get it right. It only requires you to keep showing up, even after the days you get it wrong. Progress means you can hit snooze on a Tuesday and still be someone who wakes up early, as long as Wednesday you try again. Perfection would have you believe that one missed morning erases everything you've built. Progress knows better. Progress understands that consistency was never about a flawless streak. It's about always coming back, no matter how many times you've fallen off. So if you're standing at the edge of this, waiting to feel ready, waiting for the perfect plan, waiting for motivation to hand you permission to begin, stop waiting for that moment, because it isn't coming, and it was never going to. What you actually need is far simpler, and far more available to you than you think. You need one reason. One clear, honest reason why tomorrow morning matters enough to get up for. Not someone else's reason. Not the reason that sounds impressive when you say it out loud. Your reason, the one that's true even on the days nobody's watching, and nothing feels exciting. Because once you have that, you don't need the perfect routine. You don't need to have your entire life figured out. You need one small step tomorrow morning, taken not because you feel ready, but because you finally understand why it matters. That's how every real change has ever started. Not with certainty, not with perfection, but with someone deciding, quietly, that tomorrow they would simply begin. And so can you.